It is rare indeed to pick up a book of short stories by different authors and not find a bad tale in the bunch. In the Chronicles of Burdick, 14 amazing authors tell their really good stories. They are all mysterious, fascinating, and set to some amazing pictures created by writer-illustrator Chris Van Allsburg, who creates for all who truly believe. It is my pleasure to welcome Chris Van Allsburg to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Well, thank you. The first thing I can tell you is that I'm merely, in a sense, the impresario of this collection because these drawings were discovered by myself through the efforts of a man named Peter Wenders. There are conspiracy theorists out there who suggest because the work is so similar to my own, it might actually be from my own hand, but I am sticking to my story. That these
True
are
or not?
Well, I'm just going to stick to the story and,
okay.
and assert that these are the efforts of a man named Burdick, who vanished some years ago and left behind these 14 drawings, bearing only a title and a caption. And the challenge for young readers over the years has been to take these pictures and the captions that go with them and the title of the story from which they came, and to see if they can figure out what story Burdick might have had in mind.
You've got to be a friend of Lemony Snicket. You just have to. He was here, and we had such fun and such a good time. So, for instance,
yes.
Under the Rug, 2 weeks passed, and it happened again. How did you convince these illustrious writers to be part of this, part of the compendium?
Sent out an invitation. Most of them were familiar with the original book, The Mysteries of Burdick, and my editor at Houghton Mifflin Company said, you know, over the years you've gotten thousands of stories. I told her about the stories that I'd received from different school systems, and teachers would use the book in their classrooms. And I told her how effective it was as a provocation for the storyteller in people. And then about 10 years ago, I got a request from an author wondering if they could use one of the images in a collection of their own short stories so that they could reveal to their readers what the inspiration was for that short story. And that author was Stephen King, and he had written a story that was inspired by a picture of a house lifting off the ground as if it were a spaceship.
The house on Maple Street.
The house on Maple Street, correct. And of course, I was happy to give him the rights to do that. But the result of that was that Stephen had written this, this fairly long short story, but a very compelling one. And my editor said, well, if Stephen responded to this, why don't we see if we can find some other authors that will also react to the Burdick drawing. So we sent out books, and they were all eager to jump on board.
It was a perfect liftoff,
yes,
as they say. Now, you wrote one.
I did.
Or was that you?
No, that was me.
It was you.
Yes. Well, there's some speculation on the part of Lemony Snicket in the introduction that Burdick could still be alive and that he was actually supplying these story ideas because of perhaps a protective feeling about the images. The idea that someone would take his images and write a story of their own was so disturbing to him that he would emerge from whatever seclusion he had placed himself in over the last half a century. Unlikely. He'd be very old. So I discount that. I don't know how the others authors feel, but I wrote my own.
Oscar and Alphonse.
Yes.
She knew it was time to send them back, and them just happened to be caterpillars.
Correct, yes.
And them are smart caterpillars because they can spell.
They can spell. The only information that any of us had who undertook to write these stories was the image, the title, and a caption. And you can glean from the images other little clues. In this case, simply the age of the girl, the young girl who holds the caterpillars. You can sometimes infer, often incorrectly, but infer a character from visage. I thought, well, this was a young girl who had an intelligent face. She was in a woodland setting. She had, surprisingly to me, a very large hand. and I didn't know if that was just a drawing error on the part of Burdick or whether that should be part of my story, but I decided, no, she did not have extra large extremities. It was just sort of positioned that way so that we could see the caterpillars. So I wrote a story about a little girl who finds these caterpillars and has a relationship with them. My goal in writing this particular story was to provide a solution for this picture which is unlike the solutions in the other pictures, which almost always accept the fact that something supernatural or strange is happening. I tried to write a story that suggested that there may be a natural account for these caterpillars being able to spell, which is essentially that the young girl only imagines that they can.
I see. And when she tries to tell the brothers who are practicing quantum physics or something,
correct,
that the caterpillars are pretty good at that, well, we won't give it away.
Good.
That would be blasphemous. Now, you,
yes,
when you were a young lad and decided to enter university, I thought you were going to go into math and science. Wasn't that the plan?
Something like that. It was what I excelled at as a high school student. And very impulsively, when I sat down with an admissions officer from the University of Michigan, where I finally ended up going, I just had this impulse. And I said, gee, maybe I should study art instead. Even though I had no experience in it in my high school transcript, and I actually had to sort of buffalo my way into the, through the interview and into the art school.
So the head of admissions said, do you have a portfolio? And you said?
Well, not currently. What I said to him is that the absence of art in my transcript was a result of the fact that my own personal private study took place on weekends with artists in their own studios, and I had a level of skill that could not be adequately served in the art class of my high school.
So you had to have a private tutor.
I had
of
private
course you did.
Because I was so far ahead of everyone else.
Exactly. And then there's the Norman Rockwell incident, and I hope it's true. I read
it's true
that he asked you a question about what did you think of Norman Rockwell, Saturday Evening Post, his covers.
Exactly. This was a middle-aged man who was a representative of a Midwestern college, and after we talked a little bit about my private art lessons on Saturdays, he was not convinced that I should be admitted to the art school, so he asked me a question. And I knew I was being tested, and he asked what I thought of Norman Rockwell. And I was not completely in the dark at that time. I knew there were two schools of thought about Rockwell. One that he was a sentimentalist who did images that were not much better than greeting card images.
Right, corny.
Corny. I knew I could present that idea and impress him with my sophistication. I also knew I could tell him another story, which was that Rockwell was extraordinarily gifted in his ability to capture a kind of nostalgia and a feeling about America that evaded historians, that evaded writers. In a single image, he could tell an amazing story and create a feeling about America that had true meaning. And once I'd shared those thoughts with him, he pounded his fist and he said, "You're right, son." And
Good call.
Then he picked up a pen and he put off a little check mark, and I was on my way to becoming an artist.
Yes, because you suggest that he's unfairly criticized for being sentimental.
Yes.
Now, did you take up sculpture or casting, bronze casting or something like that instead of drawing, or how did it begin?
Well, when I got to the University of Michigan, I actually discovered there were quite a few students there who did study privately on weekends because their skills were so advanced, and they'd gone to visual arts schools in Detroit. So I instantly walked into classrooms where I felt completely over my head, and they knew how to draw quite well, and I came to the conclusion that drawing was a skill that you were born with. You couldn't learn it because I was in a room with people who did it so well. And I couldn't do it well, but I could do other things well. And as a boy, I always built models. I built model cars, planes, boats. And so I had a gift for using my hands. And because I was intimidated by the skill level I saw in the drawing studios, I sort of found myself in the sculpture studios building things, making things out of wood or metal or stone, and that's where I found my success as an art student, and did that for all the years I was in school.
And eventually you learned how to illustrate and write. Who encouraged you to write?
Well, I was drawing some pictures in my apartment at night because the sculpture studio I had at that point in my life, slightly after graduating from Rhode Island School of Design, too brutally cold to work in at night. Could not sculpt. My fingers just got too cold. And so I decided I needed a hobby, and my hobby was going to be drawing pictures in a little room in my apartment. I was drawing these pictures that were somewhat narrative, and by that I mean that something was happening in the picture that was not easy to explain or not clearly explained by the picture itself. Drew a number of those, and my wife, who used picture books in school, she was an elementary school art teacher, she suggested that I think of myself as an illustrator and perhaps do some children's books. And I was resistant to that idea because I was a sculptor. But nonetheless, she said, well, why don't I just take a handful of these and go to some publishers? And she did that. Returned to our home in Rhode Island from Boston and New York with a great deal of encouragement from these publishers.
So behind every successful man is a very smart woman.
Well, one much less shy than myself, and a real believer in me, yes.
When we come back, we'll talk more about the Chronicles of Harris Burdick. It's for adults, too, for sure. It's
all ages.
It's all ages. Yes, it is. We'll come back.